You breathe, you're inhaling some of the same molecules that George Washington inhaled. You don't know how you feel about that. But it's true. That's what the scientists tell us. Do you know that every word that you speak, because of the way that sound waves work, that if you had equipment sensitive enough, those waves that you utter go on through space? Does one pebble thrown in an ocean affect the ocean? Say it with me again. I will make a difference. You might think, what difference am I going to make? It's like somebody came in to see his boss, and his boss had a sign on the desk, and it said, what I'm about to say represents 1/6 billionth of the world's opinion. Think about that. Your opinion, when you think about it, represents the opinion of about 1 out of 6 billion people. Does it make you feel very important? My opinion that I think is so important is at 1/6 billionth. And sometimes we're inclined to think, I'm not going to make any difference. I'm only 1/6 billionth. But a stone thrown in the ocean makes a difference. And they say if you've got equipment sensitive enough that you could put it out on other planets and you could pick up the voices and the words that were spoken here on Earth. A matter of fact, I don't know how it works. Some of you radio technicians out there might explain it to me someday. But they tell us that they have had people with satellite dishes that pick up broadcasts that went in space and somehow bounced off other heavenly bodies or planets and have come back to Earth years later while they're not being broadcast. Any of you heard this before? Radio frequencies that somehow bounced off something in space, came back to Earth. And you know, there you are, you're switching through your radio dial in your car or tuning your satellite dish, and all of a sudden you hear the Lone Ranger. And you, they're bringing that back again? Where'd that come from? Anyone else heard this before? I've seen it in some journals where they say, no, it can't happen. You get little snippets and they say, what was that? There's a transmission years ago that bounced off something. Jesus said every idle word that we speak has an influence. Isn't that right? Our influence may be imperceptible. Everything we do, we are reforming or corrupting others unconsciously or sometimes consciously. Everything we say and do will have an influence to reform or to corrupt those that are around us. God help us to have an influence for reformation. Amen? As in the spiritual, everyone has a shadow. Everyone has an influence for good or bad. You got your shadow with you everywhere you go. It's making a difference. I remember going to a birthday party when I was a kid, and I went to a friend's house. I just remember that he was German. And his mother, she had some strange things she did at the party. We had to have a race drinking baby formula, and I was such a clown back then. And I got sick. I thought baby formula would taste like milk. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't milk. And then they had, as a game at the party, that different people had to take turns making the group yawn. What kind of party is this? And she said, you first. I said, what? She says, you got to make them yawn. I said, how can I make them yawn? Go hold their mouths open? She said, no, you yawn in front of them. It'll make them yawn. Right? I said, all right. So she said, yawn. So I went, she said, no, you got to look like you're yawning. So I really began to try to look like I was yawning. Of course, have you ever really tried to yawn when you're not tired? It's always fake. You can't do it. It's like faking a sneeze. Never sounds real. Achoo. So there I am. I'm yawning. I'm trying to yawn. And pretty soon, someone put out a real yawn. And that's when I learned that yawning is contagious. Now, don't ever forget that when I'm preaching. You might think, well, you know, I'm not getting much out of this. Pastor's firing blanks today. And if you don't cover up your yawn, for one thing, if I see you yawn, it influences me. I won't yawn, hopefully. But have you ever noticed that when you're in a room full of people, one person yawns, it just goes around the room? We all influence each other, even in these little things. In the Caribbean, I've made a few trips to some of the islands in Nassau and Jamaica and the Caribbean there. You'll notice that many of the trees, they have this diva tree, they only have leaves on one side. Now, these trees tend to grow right along the coast. And since the wind on most of those Caribbean islands almost always comes from the east over the ocean, there are virtually no leaves on one side of the tree. And if you're ever walking around the island, you wonder which way is east on a cloudy day. Just look at the trees. They're always pointing east. So in other words, pointing west, rather, because the wind is always coming from the east. It's like a compass. If you're in the north, they say the moss always grows on the north side of the tree, right? But how do the trees get that way? In one day? Or is it over a period of time slowly from the influence of the wind that's blowing on them? The tree bends a little and all the leaves go in one direction. That's what we're doing every day. We're emitting an influence that's going to make a difference like that. Sometimes it takes years. Now, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13 and verse 14, "You are the salt of the earth." We had a sermon on salt not too long ago. But you and I are to influence the world and make it savory to the Lord. What kind of influence does salt have on the white of an egg? I'm quoting from Job now. It's like tofu. You ever eaten plain tofu? Sort of eating like thick air. Right? It's like eating mushy air. It doesn't really have a lot of flavor on its own. Stephen was arguing with us the other day. He thought that carrots had no flavor unless you put something on it. And we told him we thought maybe he's been using too much spice, because carrots do have a flavor if you haven't destroyed your taste buds. But tofu and the white of an egg, without salt, there's nothing there. But salt can make all the difference in the world. It's an influence for good. You and I are to have that kind of influence. The world is in darkness right now. And then Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5:14, "You are the light of the world." In this dark world, you and I are to have an influence of illuminating the people who are in darkness. You might think, oh, but how much influence can I have? I'm not one of these xenon headlights. Any of you noticed that more and more of the cars now are being made with these new bright headlights? Yeah, my car is almost 3 years old now, and when I bought it, it was one of the first cars that came out with these bright, it's almost like a bluish light, these xenon headlights. And you've heard me say before, the brightest light in the world that we know of right now, man-made light, is on the top of the pyramid at the Luxor Hotel there in Las Vegas. They got 45 million watt xenon lights. I don't know what they are, but they're very powerful. And they shoot all the way up into space. You can see this light. I remember landing in Las Vegas and looking at it. I got these xenon headlights on my car. And even when it's on the low beam, it gets irritating. People coming towards me flash. When you get chastised by someone else flashing their lights in your face because you've left your brights on, and they flash you. Sometimes they wait till the last minute to flash you so you can't flash them back, and they go, aha, I flashed you last. And you want to turn around and flash their rear view mirror, A couple of times I've been going down the road behind somebody, and all of a sudden they slowed down, they pulled over, they come in behind me, and then they turn on their brights, and I realized, I was following them with my bright lights on. They got tired of it. Well, now more and more lights are coming out like that. Some of us feel like, Doug, I'm not a xenon light. I'm just a little match. How big a difference can a little match make? Have you ever been in a situation where you're in absolute darkness? Go into a cavern. Karen and I took the boys years ago to one of the caverns back in Pennsylvania. I forget what it was called. She forgets too, or she would have said something. But anyway, there's a cavern back there. And, they turn off the lights for a moment, and it's an eerie darkness when you're, a couple hundred feet down in the earth and there's no artificial light. And I think at one point they shine these black lights on some of the algae and steichen that are down there and makes it illuminate. But one little light makes a big difference. You are that light. Jesus said, you're the light of the world. You might not think it's making any difference, but the world is dark. And the darker the world, the brighter your light. He said, don't put it under a bush and think I'm not going to make a difference, but let it shine. Why are we letting it shine? That it might influence. He said, let it shine before men, that they might see your good works. That's your light. Your behavior, your Christ-like goodness is your influence. And glorify your Father in heaven. Your behavior every day, whether you're smiling, the words that you speak, everything from the way that you dress has an influence, to your conduct, your expressions, your knowledge, your lifestyle. You're bringing people into the kingdom